The scent of burning coffee and maple syrup clung to Bryn Alder's skin like a second identity, one she had carefully constructed over 7 long years. Every morning began the same way. 4:15 alarm. Cold water on her face. A long look in the cracked bathroom mirror at the woman staring back. The woman no one in Willowmere truly knew. She had become a ghost wearing human routines. The Meadowlark Diner sat at the edge of town where the main road bled into endless forest, a forgotten artery connecting the human world to territories most people only whispered about. Bryn had chosen this place deliberately, close enough to civilization to disappear into its rhythms, far enough from pack lands that no wolf would think to look for her here, or so she had believed. She wiped down the counter for the third time, a nervous habit she had never been able to break. Outside, the October sky hung low and bruised, pregnant with a storm that had been threatening since dawn. The bell above the door chimed as Gideon Marsh shuffled in. 83 years old, a veteran of 2 wars, and the most reliable customer she had. "Morning, Bryn." His voice crackled like dry leaves. "You look like you haven't slept again." She forced a smile. "Just the weather. Makes everyone restless." Gideon studied her with eyes that had seen too much to be fooled by small-town pleasantries. "Storm's coming. Big one. You can feel it in your bones if you're paying attention." Bryn's hand stilled on the coffee pot. She had felt it. Not in her bones, but deeper. In the hollow space where her wolf should have lived, the void that marked her as broken, as wolfless. An omega without the one thing that made omegas valuable to any pack. But that was not her only secret. The far more dangerous truth was locked away in the small apartment above the diner, hidden behind a door she checked 4 times every night before allowing herself to sleep. A truth that would get her killed if the wrong person discovered it. The bell chimed again. Bryn looked up automatically, customer service smile already forming. And every molecule of oxygen evacuated her lungs. 3 men stood in the doorway. Their presence alone seemed to shrink the diner's dimensions, the cheap fluorescent lights flickering as though the building itself recognized what had just walked through its doors. The 2 flanking figures were clearly enforcers, built like weapons given human form. But it was the man in the center who stopped Bryn's heart. Tall. Dark hair pushed back from a face carved with brutal elegance. Eyes the color of a winter forest, green so deep it bordered on black. And when those eyes found hers across the scuffed linoleum floor, something terrible flickered in their depths. Recognition. Bryn had learned long ago that survival meant stillness. Predators tracked movement. So she became stone. "Sit anywhere you like," she managed, her voice betraying nothing. "Coffee's fresh." The man's gaze lingered for one excruciating heartbeat, then slid away, dismissing her. He moved toward the corner booth with a fluid grace that belonged to apex predators and kings. His enforcers followed like shadows. Bryn's hands trembled as she reached for 3 menus. She pressed them against her apron, steadying herself, before crossing the diner on legs that felt borrowed. "Here you go." She placed the menus on the table without meeting anyone's eyes. "Special today is chicken fried steak. I'll give you a minute." She retreated before anyone could respond. Behind the counter, she gripped the edge of the sink until her knuckles whitened. Her reflection stared back from the metal surface, distorted, fractured. Fitting. Who are they? Why are they here? Willowmere was a nothing town, population 800 on a generous census day. It had no strategic value, no pack affiliations, and no reason for wolves of that caliber to pass through. Unless they were looking for something. Unless they were looking for someone. The thought wrapped around her throat like a fist. 7 years. She had run for 7 years, changed her name twice, crossed territories that should have been impassable, buried every connection to the life she had fled so deeply that even she sometimes forgot the girl she had been before. Kaylin Morrow was dead. Only Bryn Alder remained. A quiet, wolfless omega who poured coffee and kept her head down and bothered no one. That was the story. that was the mask. She risked a glance toward the corner booth. The two enforcers were studying menus with performative disinterest, but the man in the center, he sat perfectly still, his attention fixed on the window, watching the street as though expecting something to materialize from the October gloom. In the gray morning light, she could see more of him now, the hard line of his jaw, the controlled tension in his shoulders. A thin scar tracing from his left temple into his hairline, the kind of mark that came from battles survived rather than accidents endured. And at his throat, barely visible above his collar, the edge of a tattoo. A crown of thorns wrapped around a crescent moon. Bryn's blood turned to ice. She knew that symbol. Every wolf in the Northern Territories knew it. The mark of the Voss line. The bloodline that had ruled the High Pack for over 3 centuries, which meant the man sitting in her diner, drinking her burnt coffee, was not just any alpha. He was Calder Voss, the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf on the continent, and the one man with both the resources and the ruthlessness to find anyone, anywhere, no matter how well they hid. Bryn pressed her back against the kitchen doorway, fighting the urge to run. Running would only confirm suspicion. She had to think, had to breathe. He didn't recognize you. He looked right at you and saw nothing. Because there was nothing to see. A wolfless Omega carried no scent signature, no pack bond, no marker that would distinguish her from any ordinary human. It was her greatest shame, and right now, her only protection. "Miss?" The voice came from directly in front of her. Bryn's head snapped up. One of the enforcers stood at the counter, his expression unreadable. Up close, he was younger than she had assumed, late 20s, perhaps, with close-cropped auburn hair and the kind of stillness that suggested coiled violence waiting for permission. "My alpha would like to speak with you." Not a request, a command wrapped in polite packaging. Bryn's heartbeat pounded in her ears. "Of course. Let me just... now." She nodded, mouth dry, and followed the enforcer across the diner. The corner booth felt miles away, and yet she reached it far too quickly. Calder Voss did not look up as she approached. He was studying something on his phone, his expression carved from granite. "Sit." The word was quiet, absolute. Bryn slid into the seat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap to hide their shaking. Finally, he raised his eyes, and this time there was no dismissal in them. Only a cold, calculating assessment that stripped away every mask she had ever built. "You've been in this town for 7 years, he said. Not a question. Arrived with no history, no family, no documentation that holds up under scrutiny. Her throat closed. "Which makes me wonder." He leaned forward, and his presence seemed to swallow all the air between them. "What exactly are you hiding, little Omega?" Bryn had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her nightmares, the moment when someone finally asked the right question. When the walls she had built came crashing down, she had always imagined she would run, that some primal instinct would override her frozen terror and send her fleeing into the forest, into oblivion, into anywhere that was not here. Instead, she sat perfectly still and lied. "I'm not hiding anything." Her voice came out steady, a small miracle. "I'm just a waitress. Came here after a bad divorce. Wanted a fresh start somewhere quiet." Calder Voss watched her the way a wolf watched wounded prey. "A divorce," he repeated, as though tasting the word for deceit. "And this divorce? It required you to falsify identification? To create employment records from businesses that don't exist?" How does he know that? The question must have shown on her face, because something like amusement flickered at the corner of his mouth. It did not reach his eyes. "I've had people researching this town for 3 days," he said. "Every resident, every business, every record going back 20 years. Your name kept appearing, and then disappearing. Like smoke." Bryn's carefully constructed world was crumbling, and she could do nothing but watch it fall. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't." The single word cracked like thunder. I've killed men for smaller lies. She believed him. Silence stretched between them. The diner's ancient radiator clanked. Outside, the first drops of rain began to streak the windows. Then Calder-Voss did something unexpected. He pulled a photograph from his jacket and slid it across the table. Bryn's gaze dropped to the image, and her heart stopped for the second time that morning. A child stared back at her. A little girl, perhaps 6 years old, with wild dark curls and eyes too solemn for her age. She was standing in a forest clearing, her small hand raised as though reaching for something just out of frame. And around her, suspended in the air like frozen fireflies, were dozens of leaves, held aloft by nothing visible, held by power. 3 weeks ago, Calder said, his voice dropping to something almost soft. A pack in the Eastern Territories was slaughtered. 47 wolves. The attackers were looking for a child. This child. They didn't find her. Bryn could not breathe, could not think. The girl has no official records, no pack registration, no birth documentation. His eyes bored into hers. But the survivors described a woman who helped them escape. A wolfless Omega with no scent. Who moved through the battle like she knew exactly where the danger would be before it arrived. No. 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 They described you, Bryn Alder. Or whatever your real name is. Her vision was swimming. The carefully compartmentalized boxes in her mind were bursting open, flooding her with memories she had spent 7 years trying to drown. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered. The lie tasted like ash. Calder leaned closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold buried in his wintergreen eyes. Close enough that if she had possessed a wolf, it would have been howling in either terror or submission. The child in this photograph is not just powerful, he said. She's a vessel, the first one born in 400 years, and someone is hunting her with resources that rival my own. He placed his hand flat on the photograph, his palm covering the little girl's face. I think you know where she is. I think you've always known. And I think... His voice dropped to a near whisper. You're going to tell me. Because if you don't, the people hunting her will find her first. And they will do things to that child that would make even monsters weep. Bryn's carefully constructed mask finally cracked, because the girl in the photograph was not a stranger. The girl in the photograph was sleeping upstairs, right now, in the apartment above the diner. And her name was Ivy, her daughter. The silence that followed Bryn's internal collapse stretched like a blade pressed to skin, one wrong movement away from drawing blood. Calder-Voss watched her. He had not blinked, had not moved. He simply waited with the patience of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere left to run. You recognize her, he said finally. Not a question. Bryn's throat worked, but no words emerged. Her mind was fracturing into 1,000 competing impulses. Deny everything, run, fight. Protect Ivy at any cost. But what cost was left? He already knew. Maybe not the full truth. But enough. Enough to destroy everything. She's upstairs, Bryn heard herself say. The words felt like they belonged to someone else. Sleeping. Something shifted in Calder's expression. Surprise, perhaps, quickly smothered. He had expected more resistance, more lies. Your daughter, he said. Yes? And you've been hiding her, for how long? Bryn closed her eyes, the memories pressed against her eyelids like bruises. Since before she was born. Since I realized what she would be. The enforcer with auburn hair, the one who had summoned her to the table, made a small sound. Disbelief, maybe. Or something darker. You knew, Calder said slowly, that your child would be a vessel. Before her birth. I knew there was a chance. Bryn opened her eyes, meeting the Alpha King's gaze with something that felt almost like defiance. My mother was a seer. The gift skipped me. I got nothing. No wolf, no visions. Just emptiness. But she told me, before she died, that if I ever had a daughter, the power would manifest in her, stronger than anything our bloodline had produced in generations. Your mother was Orla Morrow. The name hit Bryn like a physical blow. She had not heard it spoken aloud in 7 years. You know who I am, she whispered. I know who you were. Calder's voice carried no warmth. Kaylin Morrow, daughter of the most powerful seer the Northern Territories had seen in a century. You disappeared 7 years ago, 2 months before your arranged mating ceremony to the alpha of the Thornwood Pack. Arranged. Such a clinical word for what it had truly been. I ran, Bryn said flatly. I found out I was pregnant, and I ran. From your mate. He was never my mate. The words came out sharp, edged with old fury. He was a transaction. My mother's visions in exchange for pack protection. But she died before the ceremony, and suddenly, I was just a wolfless omega with nothing to offer, except a womb that might produce something valuable. Understanding flickered in Calder's eyes. They wanted to breed you for the bloodline. They wanted to own whatever child I produced. To raise her as a weapon. Bryn's hands had stopped shaking. Anger was replacing fear, burning through her veins like wildfire. So I disappeared. I gave birth alone in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. I changed my name, forged documents, and built a life in a town so insignificant that no one would ever think to look here. And yet someone did. The reminder crashed through her anger, leaving cold dread in its wake. The attack 3 weeks ago, she said. The Eastern Pack. How did they find her? We don't know yet. Calder's jaw tightened. The attackers left no survivors who could identify them, but they were organized, well-funded, and they knew exactly what they were hunting. A vessel. Not just any vessel. Your vessel. He leaned forward, his presence overwhelming. Do you understand what your daughter is, Kaylin? What she represents? Don't call me that. Fine. Bryn. The name sounded strange on his tongue, too small for the weight of the conversation. A vessel hasn't been born in 400 years. The last one ended a war that had lasted 3 generations. She walked onto the battlefield, and the earth itself rose to swallow the enemy forces. 10,000 wolves, buried alive in seconds. Bryn's stomach turned. Your daughter carries that same power. Perhaps more. Calder's voice dropped. And someone out there knows it. Someone with enough resources to track her across territories, to slaughter an entire pack just for information about her whereabouts. What do you want from us? The question hung in the air between them. Calder was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were measured, careful. I want to protect her. Why? Bryn's laugh was bitter, broken. So you can use her instead? Turn her into your weapon? Because if I don't, someone else will. His eyes burned into hers. And I can promise you, whoever is hunting her will not be as merciful as I am. Before Bryn could respond, a sound cut through the tension. A scream. High-pitched, terrified, coming from upstairs. Bryn was on her feet before conscious thought caught up with her body. She ran for the back stairs, heart slamming against her ribs, Calder's heavy footsteps thundering behind her. The door to the apartment was open. She had locked it. She always locked it. Bryn burst through the doorway and froze. Ivy stood in the center of the small living room, still in her pajamas, her dark curls wild around her pale face. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous. Power. The furniture was floating. The couch, the chairs, the small kitchen table, all suspended 3 feet off the ground, rotating slowly like planets orbiting an invisible sun. And standing in the corner, pressed against the wall with naked terror on his face, was a man Bryn had never seen before. He was dressed in black. A knife glinted in his trembling hand. He had come for Ivy, and Ivy's power had woken, time fractured into disconnected images. The intruder's face, young, barely more than a boy, his expression cycling between terror and desperate determination. Ivy's small form, trembling with power she could not control, tears streaming down her cheeks, the furniture spinning faster now, objects beginning to crack and splinter under invisible pressure. And then Calder Voss moved. He crossed the room in 3 strides, faster than anything human should move. His hand closed around the intruder's throat, lifting him off the ground as though he weighed nothing. "Who sent you?" The words were barely recognizable as language. They were a growl, a rumble, something that vibrated in Bryn's chest like thunder. The intruder choked, his knife clattering uselessly to the floor. "Please, I was just supposed to watch. Report back. Who sent you?" "I don't know his name. They never told us names. Please, I have a family." Calder's grip tightened. The intruder's face began to purple. "Mama?" Ivy's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. Bryn dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter into her arms. The moment they touched, something shifted. The furniture shuddered, then slowly descended back to the ground. The pressure in the room eased. "It's okay, baby," Bryn whispered, stroking Ivy's hair. "It's okay. I'm here." The bad man came through the window. Ivy was shaking violently. "I tried to make him go away. I didn't mean to. I didn't know I could." "Shh. You did nothing wrong. You protected yourself." Behind them, Calder had lowered the intruder to the ground but had not released him. The young man was gasping, his hands clawing uselessly at the Alpha's iron grip. "Rendell," Calder said, and the auburn-haired enforcer appeared in the doorway. "Take him. Find out everything he knows. Every contact, every payment, and every whisper he's ever heard about this operation." "Yes, my king." Rendell dragged the intruder away. His whimpers echoed down the stairwell, then faded into silence. Calder turned. For a long moment he simply looked at Ivy, this small, trembling child who had just demonstrated power that could level buildings. His face revealed nothing. Then he did something that surprised Bryn to her core. He knelt. Slowly, carefully, the Alpha King lowered himself to Ivy's eye level. His massive frame folded with unexpected grace until he was looking up at the little girl rather than down. "Hello, Ivy," he said. His voice had transformed completely, the thunder replaced by something almost gentle. "My name is Calder. I'm sorry that bad man frightened you." Ivy peered at him from the shelter of her mother's arms, her eyes, green, like Bryn's, but flecked with gold that had not been there at birth, studied him with an intensity that seemed far too old for her 6 years. "You're a wolf," she said. "Yes. A big one." A ghost of a smile crossed Calder's face. "The biggest, some would say." Ivy considered this. "Are you going to hurt my mama?" "No." "Promise?" Calder held the child's gaze with absolute seriousness. "I promise." Bryn watched this exchange with her heart in her throat. She did not trust him. Could not trust him. He was an Alpha King, and Alpha Kings did not kneel before wolfless Omegas and their impossible daughters without wanting something in return. But Ivy was relaxing in her arms. The trembling had stopped. Whatever Ivy sensed in him, and Bryn had long suspected her daughter sensed things far beyond normal perception, it was not threat. "We need to leave," Calder said, rising smoothly to his feet. His attention shifted to Bryn. "Now, if one operative found you, others will follow. This location is compromised." "Leave?" Bryn's arms tightened around Ivy. "And go where?" "My territory. The Voss stronghold." He must have seen the refusal forming on her face, because he continued before she could voice it. "I know what you're thinking, that I'm just another Alpha who wants to control your daughter. To use her. Aren't you?" "No." The word was simple, absolute. "I want to protect her, because she is a child and children deserve protection, and because the people hunting her," his jaw tightened, "have already taken something from me that I will never get back." Pain flickered in his eyes. Old pain, buried deep. What did they take? Bryn asked softly. Calder was silent for a long moment. My daughter, he finally said. 3 years ago. She was 7. The words landed like stones in still water. They took her to get to me, to force my hand in a territorial dispute. His voice had gone flat, hollow. By the time I found her, it was too late. Bryn's chest ached with sympathy she hadn't expected to feel. I will not let that happen to another child, Calder said. Not while I have breath in my body. So I am asking you, not commanding, asking, to let me help you. Let me protect Ivy. Please. And for the first time since he had walked into her diner, Bryn believed him. They left within the hour. Bryn moved through the apartment on autopilot, shoving clothes into bags, gathering the few possessions that mattered. Ivy's stuffed rabbit, threadbare and loved almost to destruction. The small wooden box that held Bryn's mother's ring. A leather journal filled with notes she had kept since Ivy's birth, documenting every strange occurrence, every flicker of impossible power. Evidence of the miracle she had been trying so desperately to hide. Calder's second enforcer, a woman named Seren, tall and silent with ice-blonde hair, stood guard at the apartment door. Rendell had not returned. Bryn tried not to think about what was happening to the intruder in some dark corner of the building. He came to take my daughter. He deserves whatever he gets. The thought should have disturbed her. It didn't. The car is ready, Seren announced, her voice clipped and professional. We should move. Bryn zipped the final bag and turned to find Ivy standing at the window, her small hand pressed against the glass. She was looking out at the street below, where rain now fell in earnest, blurring the world into watercolor smears. Ivy, time to go, baby. Mama. Ivy did not turn around. There are more bad men coming. The words sent ice cascading down Bryn's spine. What do you mean? How do you know? I can feel them. Ivy's voice was distant, dreamy. They're angry, and scared, and hungry. She finally turned, and her eyes, those impossible gold-flecked eyes, seemed to look through Bryn rather than at her. We have to go now. Right now. Bryn did not question it. She had learned long ago to trust her daughter's inexplicable knowledge. Seren! The enforcer appeared instantly, her hand moving to the weapon at her hip. What is it? Ivy says more are coming, now. To Seren's credit, she did not hesitate or demand explanation. She simply spoke into a small device at her collar. Vanguard, this is Shadow 2. Extraction compromised. Incoming hostiles. Move to Protocol 7. A crackling response. Then. Confirmed. Bringing the vehicle to the back. 60 seconds. They descended through the diner's kitchen, Ivy clutched tight in Bryn's arms. The familiar smells of grease and coffee now seemed alien, threatening. The life Bryn had built here was already becoming a memory. Calder met them at the back door, his expression carved from stone. Stay close. Don't stop for anything. The rain hit them like a wall as they emerged into the narrow alley behind the diner. A black SUV idled at the far end, its engine rumbling low. They were halfway to the vehicle when the first shot rang out. Seren reacted instantly, shoving Bryn forward while spinning to face the threat. A second shot cracked through the rain, and Bryn heard Seren grunt in pain. Keep moving, Calder roared, his hand closed around Bryn's elbow, propelling her toward the SUV. Don't look back. But Bryn did look back. 3 figures emerged from the shadows at the alley's mouth. They moved wrong. Too fast, too fluid, their bodies seeming to blur and shift even through the rain's distortion. Wolves. These were not ordinary hunters. These were pack warriors, shifted into a half-form that allowed for both human dexterity and lupine speed. Their faces were elongated, their hands ending in claws that glinted in the dim light. Calder released Bryn and turned to face them. What happened next would haunt her dreams for years. The Alpha King did not shift. He did not need to. He simply moved, a blur of violence so precise and devastating that Bryn's mind struggled to process it. One attacker went down with his throat crushed. A second crumpled as Calder's fist shattered his sternum. The third managed to slash at Calder's shoulder before being lifted off his feet and thrown against the brick wall with enough force to crack the mortar. It was over in seconds. Calder turned back to Bryn, blood streaming from the wound on his shoulder, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. His eyes had shifted. No longer human green but wolf gold, blazing with barely contained fury. Into the car, now. She ran. Rendell was behind the wheel, his face grim. Seren had already crawled into the back seat, one hand pressed against the bleeding wound in her side. Bryn clutched Ivy tight as she dove into the vehicle, and Calder slid in beside them a moment later. The SUV lurched forward before the door was fully closed. "Report," Calder commanded, his voice tight with controlled pain. 6 hostiles total, Rendell replied, navigating the rain-slicked streets with terrifying speed. 3 neutralized at your position, 2 more intercepted at the front, 1 escaped. 1 escaped, Calder repeated, and the words carried a weight that made Bryn's blood run cold. "They'll know we're heading north," Seren said through gritted teeth. "They'll have teams on every major road within the hour. Then we don't take major roads." Bryn looked at the Alpha King, this blood-soaked wounded man who had just killed 3 wolves with his bare hands to protect a daughter that wasn't even his. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "The truth." Calder met her gaze. In the dim interior of the speeding vehicle, his eyes had faded back to green, but something primal still lurked in their depths. "Because your daughter isn't just a vessel," he said slowly. "The people hunting her, they're not just rogue wolves or mercenaries." "Then who are they?" Calder's expression hardened. "They're my family," he said. "My brother. The man who murdered my daughter. And now he's coming for yours." The Voss stronghold emerged from the mountains like a scar carved into the earth. Bryn had expected something grand, a castle perhaps, or an estate sprawling across manicured grounds. What she found instead was a fortress built directly into the mountainside, its walls hewn from the same gray stone as the peaks surrounding it. It looked less like a home and more like a fist raised against the sky. They had driven through the night, switching vehicles twice, taking routes so convoluted that Bryn had lost all sense of direction within the first hour. Ivy had slept through most of it, her small body curled against Bryn's side, her breathing steady and peaceful, despite the chaos that had shattered their lives. Now, as the SUV passed through massive iron gates and began the winding ascent to the fortress proper, Ivy stirred. "Mama?" Her voice was thick with sleep. "Where are we?" "Somewhere safe, baby." Bryn hoped it wasn't a lie. The vehicle stopped in a courtyard that could have held 100 cars. Wolves in tactical gear patrolled the perimeter, their eyes tracking the SUV's arrival with professional alertness. Torches burned in iron sconces along the walls, casting flickering shadows despite the gray morning light. Calder exited first, his wounded shoulder now bandaged, but his movement still sharp, unhindered. He opened Bryn's door himself. "Welcome to Thornhaven," he said. The words carried no warmth, only exhaustion and something heavier. "You'll be safe here." Bryn stepped out, Ivy's hand clutched in hers. The mountain air bit at her cheeks, cold and thin and smelling of pine. "For how long?" Calder did not answer. A woman descended the fortress steps to meet them. She was perhaps 60, her silver hair pulled back in a severe braid, her posture rigid with authority. She wore no jewelry, no adornment, only simple black clothing that somehow conveyed more power than any crown. "Grandmother," Calder said, inclining his head. "This is Bryn Alder and her daughter, Ivy. They'll be staying in the East Wing." The woman's gaze swept over Bryn with clinical assessment. Whatever she saw did not impress her. "A wolfless Omega," she said flatly, "and a child of unknown lineage. You bring strays into our stronghold while your brother's forces mass at our borders?" The child is a vessel. Silence crashed down like a hammer. The woman, Calder's grandmother, went utterly still. Her eyes dropped to Ivy, and for the first time, something other than cold disapproval flickered in their depths. Impossible, she breathed. The bloodlines were lost. The seers confirmed it centuries ago. The seers were wrong. Calder's voice hardened. And now Vashon knows. He's already made one attempt. There will be more. Vashon. The brother. The man who had murdered Calder's daughter. Bryn filed the name away like a weapon she might need later. The grandmother studied Ivy for a long moment. Ivy stared back, unblinking, with that unsettling calm she sometimes displayed. The calm of someone seeing things invisible to everyone else. "You carry fire in your blood, child," the old woman said quietly. "I can feel it from here." Ivy tilted her head. "You're sad," she said simply. "You miss your flowers, the ones in the garden that died last winter." The grandmother's face went white. "How do you know about my garden?" Ivy shrugged. "I just know things sometimes." A charged silence followed. Then, slowly, the hard lines of the grandmother's expression began to soften. "I am Isolde Voss," she said, her voice losing some of its edge. "And it seems, child, that you are far more than you appear." She turned to Calder. "East Wing, the secured chambers. I'll have Marin prepare rooms." Calder nodded, and something that might have been gratitude passed between them. As Isolde swept back up the steps, Bryn allowed herself to breathe. "Your grandmother," she said carefully. "She's terrifying?" Calder supplied. "Yes, but she's also the reason this stronghold has never fallen, not in 300 years. He began walking toward a side entrance, clearly expecting Bryn to follow. She did, Ivy's hand warm in hers. You said your brother is massing forces," Bryn said as they moved through stone corridors lit by flickering torchlight. "What does that mean?" "It means war is coming." Calder's jaw tightened. "Vashon controls the southern packs now. He's been consolidating power for years, eliminating rivals, building alliances. The attack on your diner wasn't random, it was reconnaissance. He's testing my defenses, probing for weaknesses. And Ivy? Ivy is the key to everything." Calder stopped before a heavy wooden door, turning to face her. "A vessel's power is tied to their protector. Whoever bonds with Ivy, whoever earns her complete trust, will be able to channel her abilities. Do you understand what that means?" Bryn's stomach turned. "You're saying—" "I'm saying that whoever controls your daughter controls the most destructive force this world has seen in 4 centuries. His eyes burned into hers. "Vashon will do anything to possess that power. Anything. And right now, the only thing standing between him and Ivy is me." The weight of his words settled over Bryn like a funeral shroud. "Then we need to make sure you're enough," she said quietly. Something shifted in Calder's expression. Surprise, perhaps. Or respect. "Yes," he agreed. "We do." He opened the door to reveal chambers far more luxurious than Bryn had expected. A sitting room, 2 bedrooms, and a small kitchen. Fire already crackled in the hearth. "Rest," Calder said. "You're safe for now. But tomorrow, we plan." He turned to leave. "Calder." The name felt strange on her tongue. "Thank you." He paused at the threshold, his back still turned. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "The hard part hasn't even begun." Then he was gone, and Bryn was left alone with her daughter, her fear, and the terrible certainty that their lives would never be the same. 3 days passed in a blur of guarded routines and growing tension. Bryn learned the rhythms of Thornhaven, the changing of guards at dawn and dusk, the way servants moved through corridors like silent ghosts, the distant sounds of wolves training in the courtyard below. She learned that Isolde Voss took tea at precisely 4 o'clock, and that anyone who interrupted faced consequences best left unspoken. And she learned that Calder Voss was a man of contradictions. He was brutal and efficient in war councils, his voice cutting through debate like a blade. She had watched through a cracked door as he interrogated the captured operative from the diner, his questions precise and merciless. The man had broken within an hour, spilling everything he knew, which, tragically, wasn't much. But with Ivy, he was different. On the second evening, Bryn had found them in the fortress library. Ivy was perched on a leather chair far too large for her small frame, and Calder sat on the floor beside her, his long legs folded awkwardly beneath him. He was reading aloud from a book of fairy tales, his deep voice somehow gentle as he gave distinct voices to each character. Ivy had been giggling. Her daughter, who had spent 6 years hiding from a world that wanted to consume her, was laughing at the Alpha King's terrible impression of a talking rabbit. Bryn had retreated before either of them noticed her, her heart twisting with something she couldn't name. Now, on the third night, she found herself unable to sleep. The fire had burned low in the sitting room. Ivy was safely tucked into bed, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. But Bryn's mind would not quiet. She slipped out of their chambers and wandered the torch-lit corridors, following instinct more than direction. The fortress was labyrinthine, but somehow she found herself at a set of glass doors that opened onto a small balcony overlooking the mountains. Calder was already there. He stood with his back to her, his hands gripping the stone railing, his face turned up toward the star-scattered sky. He wore no jacket despite the cold, and the thin fabric of his shirt did nothing to hide the tension knotted in his shoulders. "You should be sleeping," he said, without turning around. "So should you." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Sleep and I are not on speaking terms these days." Bryn moved to stand beside him, maintaining careful distance. The mountain air was sharp in her lungs, carrying the scent of snow from the peaks above. "You're good with her," she said quietly. "Ivy. She doesn't trust easily. She never has." Calder was silent for a long moment. "Children deserve gentleness," he finally said. "The world will teach them hardness soon enough." "Is that what happened to you?" His jaw tightened. "My father believed that strength was forged through suffering. He raised Vashan and me accordingly." "And your daughter?" The question slipped out before Bryn could stop it. "Was she?" "Nadia." The name seemed to cause him physical pain. She was light. Pure, unfiltered light. Everything good that I had never been. Bryn's chest tightened with unexpected grief. "When Vashan took her, I thought I would burn the world to ash to get her back." Calder's voice had gone hollow. "I nearly did. I led 300 wolves against his stronghold. We killed everyone we found. But Nadia..." He stopped. Breathed. She was already gone. He had disposed of her the moment he realized I would not yield to his demands. "I'm sorry." The words were inadequate. Pathetically so. "I've spent 3 years hunting him, building forces, planning, all for the moment when I can finally put my hands around his throat." Calder turned to look at her, and his eyes in the moonlight were shattered. "And now your daughter appears, a child with power that could end this war in a single moment. Do you understand the temptation that represents?" Bryn's heart hammered. "You said you wanted to protect her." "I do." He stepped closer, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body despite the mountain cold. "But I would be lying if I said part of me doesn't look at Ivy and see a weapon. A way to finally destroy Vashan. To make him suffer as I have suffered." "Then why haven't you tried to use her?" "Because I am not my brother." The words were fierce, absolute. "And because when I look at Ivy, I also see Nadia. I see every innocent thing I failed to protect. And I will not, cannot, become the monster that destroys her too." They stood in silence, the weight of his confession hanging between them. Then, slowly, Bryn reached out and placed her hand over his where it gripped the railing. "You're not a monster," she said softly. "A monster wouldn't struggle. A monster wouldn't care." Calder went utterly still. His gaze dropped to their joined hands, then rose to her face. You don't know what I've done. You're right. I don't. Bryn held his gaze. But I know what you've done for us. For Ivy. And right now that's enough. Something cracked in his expression, a fracture in the iron control he maintained so carefully. Bryn. Her name in his voice was a rough whisper. Yes? He lifted his free hand, and for a breathless moment she thought he might touch her face. His fingers hovered an inch from her cheek, trembling almost imperceptibly. Then he pulled back. You should get some sleep, he said, his voice strained. Tomorrow will be difficult. He stepped away from the railing, away from her, and disappeared into the fortress without another word. Bryn remained on the balcony for a long time, her hand still warm where it had touched his, her heart racing with something that felt dangerously like hope. The attack came at midnight on the fourth day. Bryn woke to screaming. Not Ivy's screaming. She confirmed that immediately, her body lunging toward her daughter's room on pure instinct. Ivy was awake, sitting up in bed, her eyes wide and glowing with that strange inner light that appeared when her power stirred. They're here, Mama, Ivy whispered. The bad wolves. So many of them. Bryn pulled her daughter into her arms as explosions shook the fortress walls. The door burst open, and Seren appeared. Fully healed now, her ice-blonde hair pulled back for battle, weapons strapped across her body. We need to move, she said, her voice clipped. Vashen's forces breached the eastern wall. The Alpha King is holding the main courtyard, but they're flanking us. Flanking. Bryn's mind raced. They knew exactly where we were. Someone talked. Seren's expression was grim. We'll find the traitor later. Right now, survival. They moved through the fortress at a run, Ivy clinging to Bryn's neck. The stone corridors that had seemed so solid now felt like a trap, every shadow potentially hiding death. The sounds of battle grew louder, snarls and screams and the wet crunch of violence. Seren led them down a narrow staircase, through a hidden door, into passages Bryn hadn't known existed. There's a tunnel system, Seren explained, her eyes constantly scanning. Leads out to the forest 3 miles north, if the main defenses fall. She never finished the sentence. A wolf emerged from the shadows ahead, massive, black-furred, its eyes burning with malevolent intelligence. It shifted mid-leap, becoming a man whose face was a twisted mirror of Calder's, Vashen. He was taller than his brother, leaner, with the same dark hair but eyes that held nothing but cold calculation. A jagged scar split his left cheek, and when he smiled, it did not reach anywhere near his gaze. There you are, he purred. The little vessel. I've been looking for you. Seren moved to intercept, her blade flashing. Vashen caught her throat in one hand and squeezed. The sound of her neck snapping echoed through the tunnel like a gunshot. Bryn screamed. Vashen dropped Seren's body and stepped over it like discarded refuse. His attention fixed on Ivy with terrible hunger. Such power, he breathed. I can feel it radiating from you, child, like standing near a furnace. He extended a hand. Come with me. I can teach you to use what you have, to become something glorious. Ivy pressed her face against Bryn's shoulder. No. No? Vashen's smile turned cruel. I wasn't asking. He lunged. Bryn did the only thing she could. She turned her body, shielding Ivy, preparing to die for her daughter as she had always known she might. The blow never came. Calder materialized from the darkness like vengeance given form. He slammed into his brother with enough force to crack the stone wall behind them, his roar shaking dust from the ceiling. The brothers crashed together in a fury of claws and teeth. Even in human form, they fought like the wolves they were, brutal, primal, seeking kill shots with every strike. Run! Calder bellowed between blows. Get her out! But Bryn could not move. Her legs had turned to water. Seren was dead. Her protector, her guide. And the only path forward led past 2 alpha wolves trying to tear each other apart. Vashen landed a vicious slash across Calder's chest. Blood sprayed. Calder staggered. Still protecting strays, brother? Vashan circled, his claws dripping crimson. You always were weak. Father knew it. That's why he chose me as his successor. Father chose wrong, Calder snarled, pressing a hand against his wound. Just as you're wrong now. Am I? Vashan's eyes flickered to Bryn and Ivy. I wonder. Let's test that theory. He moved, not toward Calder but toward them, and Ivy's power erupted. The tunnel shook. Stones tore from the walls, whipping through the air like missiles. The very earth groaned and shifted, rising up between Vashan and his prey. Vashan was thrown backward, his body slamming against the ceiling before crashing to the floor. But Ivy was convulsing in Bryn's arms, her small body racked with spasms, blood streaming from her nose. The power was too much. It was consuming her. Ivy, baby, stop! You have to stop! The telekinesis collapsed. The floating stones crashed down, and Ivy went limp, her breathing shallow and her skin paper white. Vashan was already rising, already healing, his laughter echoing through the ruined tunnel. Magnificent, he breathed. Absolutely magnificent, but untrained, uncontrolled. She'll burn herself out before she ever reaches her potential. His eyes gleamed. Unless someone teaches her, unless someone bonds with her. Calder struggled to his feet, swaying. His wounds were severe, too severe. He was losing too much blood. You'll never have her, he growled. Won't I? Vashan smiled. Look at yourself, brother. You're dying. And when you're gone, he spread his arms. Who will stop me? Calder's knees buckled. He collapsed against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. And Bryn, clutching her unconscious daughter, her protector dying before her eyes, felt hope drain away like blood into stone. Vashan advanced slowly, savoring his victory. You know what the tragedy is, brother? He stepped over rubble, his movements unhurried. You actually could have stopped me, if you had been willing to use the girl, to bond with her, take her power for yourself. But you were too noble. He spat the word like poison. Too concerned with protecting the innocent. Calder tried to rise. Failed. His hand left bloody smears on the stone wall. Innocence, Vashan continued, is just weakness that hasn't been exploited yet. Father taught us that. You simply refused to learn. He reached Bryn and looked down at her with cold amusement. A wolfless omega. How fitting that you'd attach yourself to broken things, Calder. He crouched, bringing his face level with Bryn's. Don't worry, I won't kill you. Someone needs to care for the girl between her training sessions. A mother's presence can be motivating. Bryn's fear was a living thing, coiled tight in her chest. But beneath it, something else stirred. Something that had lain dormant for 7 years. Something that felt like fire. You don't know anything about me, she whispered. I know enough. You're nothing. A defect? A wolf who couldn't even manifest her own. I'm not wolfless. The words came from somewhere deep inside her. From a truth she had buried so completely that she had almost forgotten it existed. Vashan's expression flickered. What? I'm not wolfless. Bryn's voice grew stronger. I never was. My wolf has been here all along. I just locked her away. Because my mother told me to. Because she saw what would happen if anyone ever discovered what I really am. The fire was building now, spreading through her veins like molten gold. Your mother was a seer, Vashan said slowly, his confidence cracking. She saw futures. She saw my future. Bryn's eyes began to change, not wolf gold, but something else. Something that glowed like embers. She saw what I would become if I ever unlocked my true nature. And it terrified her. Terrified her so much that she sealed my wolf away when I was 6 years old, bound my power so deeply that even I believed it was gone. Vashan scrambled backward. What are you? Bryn stood. Ivy was still unconscious in her arms, but the weight felt different now, lighter, as though strength was flooding into her from some inexhaustible source. My mother wasn't just a seer, Bryn said. She was the last descendant of the Morrow bloodline, the bloodline that created the first vessels, 400 years ago. The bloodline that carries the original power. Understanding dawned in Vashen's eyes, and with it, fear. That's impossible. The Morrows were destroyed. They went into hiding, changed their names, scattered across territories where no one would think to look. Bryn's voice had deepened, resonating with harmonics that seemed to vibrate the very air. My mother hid me, because she knew that one day, someone would come for my daughter. And when that day came, the fire erupted. Not physical flames, but something far more devastating. Pure, radiant power that poured from Bryn like light from a star. The tunnel blazed with golden luminescence. The rubble disintegrated. The very stones sang with primordial energy. She knew I would need to be ready. Vashen shifted, launching himself at her in desperate attack. Bryn raised one hand. The alpha wolf froze mid-leap, suspended in air, his limbs locked in place by power that predated pack hierarchies and territorial claims. Power that answered to blood and bond and the fierce, unbreakable love of a mother for her child. You came for my daughter, Bryn said, her voice echoing with the weight of 4 centuries. You killed innocents to find her. You would have turned her into a weapon, broken her spirit, and consumed her light. She stepped forward. The golden glow intensified. But you forgot something, Vashen Voss. You forgot that vessels don't just channel power. Her eyes blazed into his. They inherit it. From their mothers. From their grandmothers. From an unbroken line stretching back to the first wolf who ever walked this earth. Vashen struggled against her hold, his face contorted with rage and terror. You can't. This isn't. My daughter is a vessel, because I am one too. Bryn's voice dropped to a whisper. I just never knew. Never let myself know. Until you threatened the only thing in this world that matters to me. She clenched her fist. Vashen screamed as golden light wrapped around him like chains, burning through his defenses, stripping away his power layer by layer. I won't kill you, Bryn said. That's not my choice to make. She turned to where Calder had managed to pull himself upright, leaning heavily against the wall. His eyes were wide, his face pale with blood loss and shock. He's yours, Bryn said simply. Do what you need to do. Calder stared at her for a long moment. At this woman who had transformed from a frightened Omega into something radiant and terrifying. Something that rewrote everything he thought he knew about power and bloodlines and fate. Then he pushed off the wall, crossed to his brother, and knelt beside the broken wolf who had taken everything from him. 3 years, Calder said quietly. 3 years I've imagined this moment. What I would say. What I would do. Vashen spat blood. Then do it. Finish it. Calder was silent for a long moment. No, he finally said. Death would be mercy, and you have never shown mercy to anyone. He looked up at Bryn. Hold him, until we can transport him to the council for judgment. Let the packs decide his fate. Bryn nodded. The golden chains tightened, and Vashen slumped into unconsciousness. Only then did Bryn's power begin to fade. The light dimmed, her knees buckled. Calder caught both her and the still unconscious Ivy, his wounded arms somehow finding the strength to keep them from falling. You're a vessel, he breathed. Apparently? Bryn's laugh was exhausted, bordering on hysterical. Surprise? Despite everything, the blood, the death, the impossible revelations, Calder smiled. I think, he said softly, we have a lot to talk about. The dawn found them in the fortress's healing wing. Ivy woke first, her eyes fluttering open to find her mother dozing in a chair beside her bed. The little girl was pale, dark circles bruising the delicate skin beneath her eyes, but her voice was strong when she spoke. Mama? Did we win? Bryn startled awake, her hand immediately finding Ivy's. Yes, baby, we won. And the bad man? The one who felt like shadows? He's gone. He can't hurt us anymore. Ivy considered this with the solemnity of a child who had seen too much. You were glowing, she said. I saw it in my dreams. You were like a sun. Bryn's throat tightened. I was trying to protect you. I know. Ivy's small fingers squeezed her mother's hand. You always protect me. But Mama, she hesitated. You were sad before. Inside, where you hid it. But you don't feel sad anymore. Trust her daughter to see what no one else could. No, Bryn admitted softly. I don't think I am. For 7 years, she had lived as half a person, incomplete, broken. She had accepted the lie of her wolflessness so completely that it had become her identity, a cage she had built around herself one bar at a time. But the cage was gone now. The bars had melted in golden fire. And what remained was not the frightened girl who had fled her pack, but something stronger, something whole. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Calder stood in the doorway. His chest was bandaged, his arm in a sling, but he moved with the careful precision of someone who had already pushed past his body's limits multiple times that day. May I come in? Bryn nodded. He crossed to Ivy's bedside and lowered himself into a chair with a barely suppressed wince. For a moment, the three of them simply existed in the same space, the Alpha King, the newly awakened vessel, and the child who had started it all. Vaishon has been transported to the High Council, Calder said. He'll face judgment within the fortnight. Whatever the outcome, he will never be free again. And his forces? Scattered. Without their leader, the coalition he built is already fracturing. The war we feared. He exhaled slowly. May not come after all. Relief washed through Bryn like a tide. What happens now? Calder's gaze moved from her to Ivy, then back again. That depends on you. His voice was careful. You're a vessel. Perhaps the most powerful one born in centuries. The Pax will want to study you. Understand your abilities. There will be those who seek to use you, just as Vaishon did. Bryn's spine stiffened. Let them try. Or... Calder hesitated, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked uncertain. You could stay here, at Thornhaven, under my protection. Your protection, Bryn repeated. The stronghold is secure. Ivy could be educated here, trained to control her abilities safely, and you... He stopped, struggled, then pushed forward. You would have a home, if you wanted one. The offer hung in the air between them. Bryn thought about the diner, the life she had built, the anonymity she had clung to like a drowning woman clutching driftwood. None of it existed anymore. It had been burned away the moment Calder Voss walked through her door. But perhaps that was not a tragedy. Perhaps it was a beginning. Ivy? Bryn turned to her daughter. What do you think? Would you like to stay here? Ivy looked at Calder with those knowing eyes of hers. He makes you smile, she said simply. When you think no one's watching. He makes you smile like you mean it. Bryn's cheeks flushed. Calder's expression softened into something almost wondering. I suppose that settles it then, Bryn said quietly. She met Calder's eyes, and what passed between them needed no words. We'll stay. 1 month later, the nightmares had stopped. Bryn stood on the same balcony where she had first touched Calder's hand, watching the sun set behind the mountains in ribbons of amber and rose. The air was warmer now, carrying the first hints of spring. Below, in the courtyard, she could hear Ivy laughing. Her daughter was training with Isolde, the fearsome grandmother who had somehow become Ivy's most devoted teacher. The old woman had a gift for coaxing power without forcing it, for building control rather than suppression. Ivy was flourishing under her guidance. They both were. Footsteps sounded behind her. Bryn did not turn. She's getting stronger every day, Calder said, coming to stand beside her. His shoulder had healed, the sling long since discarded. Isolde says she's never seen potential like this. And that doesn't frighten you? No. His hand found hers on the railing, warm, solid, certain. It gives me hope. Bryn leaned into him slightly, allowing herself the comfort of his presence. They had not defined what existed between them, had not put words to the way his eyes sought hers across crowded rooms, or the way her heartbeat quickened whenever he entered a space. But the connection was there, growing stronger with each passing day. Some things did not need to be rushed. Vaishan's sentence came down this morning, Calder said. Exile, permanent. They're sending him to the Void Territories, the frozen reaches where even wolves cannot survive long. Is that enough? It will have to be. His grip tightened on her hand. I'm done letting him live in my head. He took enough from me. I won't give him any more. Bryn understood. She had her own ghosts. Years of running, hiding, denying. But ghosts only had power if you fed them. She was done feeding hers. Mama, Calder, watch. They looked down to see Ivy standing in the center of the courtyard, her small face screwed up in concentration. Above her, a dozen stones rose gently into the air, spinning in a slow, controlled orbit. She wasn't straining, wasn't bleeding, she was playing. And when she looked up at them, her smile was brighter than the setting sun. Bryn's eyes blurred with tears she did not try to hide. We made it, she whispered. Oh, Calder lifted their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. No, he said softly, we're just beginning. And as the last light of day painted the mountains in gold, Bryn finally let herself believe it. They were safe. They were whole. They were home.